Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast with Tanya Vasallo. Before we get into this episode, I want to share with you that I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please rate, review, and share the podcast. And in exchange, and as my way to say thank you to you, I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And we are here with Holly Homer. Welcome, Holly. Yay!
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes. Well, I'm so curious to hear about your journey, how you basically, I think this is some of those wishes that people have. It's just like you just started something that you were passionate about, and then suddenly it turned into your career. I mean, how many people don't wish that that could happen to them? It's almost like the model being discovered on the streets, right?
Yeah, except this suddenly really needs air quotes because it was like 20 years ago.
So walk us through it, Holly. What's your story? Why are you doing the work that you're doing? And tell us about the work you're doing right now. But walk us through the whole path of how you got here.
About 100 years ago. No. Yeah, it all started. I was a physical therapist and, that I worked in kind of the field of chronic pain. I loved my job, but one of the passions that I'd always had was to be a stay-at-home mom. And so, I had been married 10 years. One of the things I had always said to my husband was, when, you're going to have to support us when I get pregnant. And so finally it happened for us. That's a whole nother story. And so I went home and stayed at home, but I had my career had been really very important to me. And my mom laughed and said, "You're never going to be able to stay home. You'll be bored to death." And which I totally get. I might have overdone the scrapbooking and stuff like that. I was just a person that has to be obsessively busy to a certain extent. And there are, anybody who's spent time with children, especially babies, there is a lot of downtime. And it's not usually just downtime without things you have to do. You usually have things you have to do, but it's really kind of boring, low energy time. So during that time, I did feel very isolated. And so one of the things I did was I started emailing back and forth with a friend who I'd gone to college with. And at that point, she had 2 boys, I had 2 boys, and we were just sending these really long emails back and forth. And this is pre-social media. This is, 20 some years ago. And so every Saturday morning, I would get her email. It was a big, long email, and I'd write her all back. And we did that for about a year. And that friendship and that connection, which, was early online connection for me, was super important. In fact, I really, I would think about it during the week and say, "Oh, I can't wait till Saturday. I'll tell Jody about this, and get some feedback." And it was just a really important relationship for me that basically had been fostered online. And so about a year into it, I go to pick up my Saturday email, and the subject line is, "I think we need to stop emailing each other." And I'm like, this horrifying dread comes over me. What did I do? And I open up the email, and Jody says, "There's this thing called blogging." And she's like, "I've been emailing someone else." What? So she's been cheating on me this whole time. But anyway, she's like, "I've been emailing someone else, and it would just be easier for me instead of writing these big emails if we just wrote blogs, and we can go to each other's blogs and we can just keep doing this. But instead of sending it in an email, we'll do these blogs." Well, I had no idea what a blog was. I'd never read a blog, never seen a blog. But that day I became a blogger because I needed this relationship. So she had put a little link in to go to Blogspot, and fill out the form to become a blogger.
How crazy.
And so that's how I started. And, when I hadn't literally, I would never been online. I didn't know anything about it. This is all new to me. So I go and then I realized that, kind of like, oh, I could upload pictures and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I was literally making multiple scrapbooks for like my mom and my grandma and all these people. And so I was like, this is going to save me so much money. So I started posting the pictures and kind of the things online that I would have sent, put it in a scrapbook. And about 3 weeks in, I got a comment from someone on a blog post that wasn't my mom, it wasn't Jody. And I like clicked through on like her thing and I was like, oh my goodness, other people blog. So, and she had like, because this is back in the days of blog rolls. And so she had a blog roll in her sidebar. And so I like dove in head first and went through all the blogs that she had. And then I just threw myself into the blogging community because I found people just like myself that were feeling isolated, stay at home moms, with like kind of hopes and dreams that we were just like, sharing online. And some of those people on Megan's blog roll are still some of my best friends today because that community is kind of what a lot of you would associate with social media today is, we just found each other and we're able to tell our stories back and forth. And instead of, going and sharing on Facebook, we were sharing on our blogs and then commenting on each other's blog posts. And so it was just in the early days of being, kind of the stay-at-home mom and figuring out how to work this all and just kind of getting through the day. And that was where like a big part of my support system.
So then you have this support system, you have these new people that are reading your blog, you're starting to create community. And what are you blogging about? Just about the kids, about your scrapbooks? Like what kind of things are in the blog and how did it start growing, of like.
Yeah. So the early days, it's horrifying when I look back at it. Like it was like a picture, a really bad picture, and then like a few sentences. And then because you have to remember, I'm a scientist. Like I've never written anything. you know, I didn't start this because like I thought I had anything to share. I like literally, I wanted a connection. That's how I started it. And then when I started realizing that I could tell stories, and it was really cool because it was therapeutic for me and I think in the trenches of being like, like a mom, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this in different ways. It may not be a stay-at-home mom, but like this is something that I had hoped for a really long time. And then you get in the middle of it and you realize kind of the long hours. Like it's not exactly like that, that version from, Modern Family or something like that, where everybody's dressed lovely and laughing at each other and stuff like that. Like these are countless hours of, kind of boredom and like trouble, but not really trouble. And just like, it's a little relentless. And so I started writing about like the day and, and in kind of in the day with a silver lining. And so literally I was writing about nothing. So like not as funny as Seinfeld, but literally Seinfeld, whatever happened during the day, I had to figure out how to tell that story. But then I always wanted it to have like kind of an uplifting, like, hey, this is what I wanted.
Take away from
this
it.
is I'm living the dream, because even at that point, I saw a lot of moms out there with a lot of complaints. And I totally, hey, I'm first in line to say, like, like there's things that, I complain about too. But on the other hand, I wanted the perspective to always be grounded in, like, I am living the dream. I am very lucky and blessed. I have these children that I wanted, I'm living this life that I really desired, even though even though the dog threw up and, 3 people peed on the floor, So the writing about that in kind of the silver lining. And what I found was, and what a lot of people I think find through journaling is all of a sudden, when all hell breaks loose in my house, I'm not like in a trigger reaction. I'm actually standing back, watching the chaos and thinking, how can I write about this in a funny way? And so it gave me a perspective that I found invaluable as a mom and as a human, and being able to stop the like just being angry and reactionary within like a situation, and actually getting a little perspective to stand back and kind of laugh my way through it because like, oh, thank God I have a good story. And because I was writing every day, and that was one of the things that I had committed to early on when I was like, you know what, I really enjoy writing. I want to get better at this. And so, like, when you're living a life of, the biggest thing might be like go to the park or stop at Sonic for a drink, like that's your highlight of the day. Like, you really are having to stretch for storytelling. So, when something crazy does happen, all of a sudden it's not a catastrophe in your life. It's like, oh, thank goodness I have something to write about.
What a great perspective, though, to flip that around, and just turn it around where you're like, oh my God, my days are so blah and so routine, like, is this really the dream that I
This
was
is
wanting
the dream.
to live? And I think that happens to many of us once we become parents. I remember for me, it also took a long time to become a mom. And then just the moment my daughter was born and the exhaustion and the hormones going crazy, I was like, oh my God, this is like a cult. Parenthood is a cult. They don't tell you how
They
hard this
lied.
is. Yes, they lie, Holly. You're totally right. And I remember telling my sister-in-law that has 4 kids, I was like, this is a cult. Like, you guys, now you lied to me and now there's no turning back. Like, I'm stuck with this, so, oh, that is funny.
I'm stuck
So
with this blessing. And I think that's really like that juxtaposition that we live. And I think every beautiful blessing has that juxtaposition. It's just really obvious in parenting. Like, God made those kids helpless. Like, you are in complete control, yet you have no control. So
yeah,
it's a
but
it's a really big patience lesson.
it absolutely is. And at least you're ahead. Your kids are now grown and out of the home, you were telling me before we
Woo!
hopped on.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, you're ahead of the game, but
the
you also
promised
want to
land.
enjoy every phase, right? With kids,
Really
because
did. And then so like the early days was really about telling the story of like being in the trenches of motherhood. And so I had accidentally started one of the first mom blogs. And I had no idea what that was. And that wasn't even a thing when I started. And so it was really interesting to see kind of the coming into favor and going out of favor and coming into favor and going out of favor of the actually traditional mom blog. And so, but at that time, my blog was called June Cleaver Nirvana. So I was also early on the front end of sponsorships and like what was like early influencer, which I have to laugh at the word influencer because like we were the people that were telling stories online at that time. And we were the people that were being, kind of brought into companies to tell their stories and stuff like that. And so I got like, because of my business background running physical therapy clinics and stuff like that, I saw very early on that like I said, at one point I said like nobody's making money except like 2 people, like Martha Stewart and Deuce were making money and no one else was making money at that point. And I said, but somebody is sometime. And if somebody is, I might as well. So I was just open to turning this passion into a business from the very beginning, which just meant I just like walked down a lot of paths. 98% of them ended at, nowhere. And, 2% of them like would have an opportunity or an adventure or some money or, and so it was just like trial and error. Just always thinking, hey, maybe this will work out. And that's how I ended up with a business that supports my family. When the kids were like grade school age, I realized their stories are no longer mine, and so I had an existential crisis because I'm like, I don't have anything outside of these kids. Like, what am I going to write on? So that's how Kids Activities blog came into being. Is at that time, no one was really writing about crafting and activities as a how-to. And so kind of switched around to that because it wasn't personal. I wasn't going to ruin my children's lives by writing about crafting and kids activities and coloring pages, because the mom bloggers were the early ones to realize that these children were going to live online from day one, and were going to be marked with their history in a cement way that no other generation has ever been saddled with. And so I had to really switch out when I realized that like what I was writing about them could be something that affects their, God forbid, employment someday.
Well, kudos to you. I commend you for that because it's in a way, it's kind of like what we're doing with social media nowadays, like from the moment the baby's born, we're posting all the photos on social media. And then what if when the kid turns 15, 20, they don't want to go there, or teenage years. So I really commend you for honoring that part with your kids of saying, you know what, it's no longer my stories anymore. It's their stories.
It's
And
their
that's a
story.
huge point.
Yeah.
And are they thankful that you didn't continue telling their stories, or would they have wished that you did?
So the funny thing is they really like, in fact, this came up. My oldest is married. And so I was talking to his wife about it, and I have three boys. So like they were never, they were always bloggers, in their memory, they were always, kids of a blogger. So like the photographs and the like if the sponsorships, and even early on, like if we were sponsorship, I had contracts with them and they were paid as employees for the contract so that they could be, it was selfish on my point, so I could fire them, but like, so early on, I was very cognizant of what is going online. And because that, like early on was kind of willy nilly, but by the time they were really interactive, it was like, hey, we have this thing. Do you want to be involved in it? It would require X, Y, and Z. It'd be 3 pictures. It would be a video or whatever. Are you in? Are you out? They got to decide that. I never was really writing behind their backs in their modern, within the last 15 years. But they didn't really know that because they weren't reading the blog. You know what I mean? So they, like, to a certain extent, like the privacy that I guarded so with such fervor, they don't even realize that it happened.
They didn't know.
Which is fine. Like I want them to be able to write their own story online. So, and by the way, all 3 of them are really like not, I think between the 3 of them, they posted like 5, pictures on social media in the last 2 years. They're just not involved in social media. But part of that is because I made that uncool.
Well, in a way, maybe that was a blessing for them.
But then they're also boys. So I think boys get, especially boys like mine, get a lot of their social through video games, which is a whole nother animal. But it's kind of a less like, set in stone animal. Like they can say something that like disappears. Whereas, if you're on Instagram and filming every single moment of your life, that is more of something that people, is more public.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick pause and we'll be right back. Hi there. I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcast, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com. and we'll get you set up with access to the course. You can also find other free goodies in the show notes. Go check them out. So let's go back. You mentioned something that was interesting to me, and I'd love to share with our audience because they don't know about you. So you took the blog, and what you had mentioned is about is living the dream, like I'm living the dream. And then you would, even though the dream wasn't exactly, like we want the dream to be like every single day we're happy and it's rainbows and unicorns, and it doesn't go that way. So what would you say to our listeners about how they can live their dream and follow their passion and then turn things into business versus the reverse way where it's like, oh, well, what business can I start? And I'm sure it works both ways, but I'm a big believer of just follow your passion. And it seems like that's what you've been doing all along, Holly. Can you share with us how the blog just exploded? How many followers, or were they even followers, subscribers? I don't even know what you would call the bloggers in that time, but how your path grew from that. And then it opened up to other passions. I'd love for you to share your story because it's so unique and different and inspiring with that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I had going for me, and I think the early bloggers had going, anybody online, is there was no path. Like we were making crap up. Like there was no one to say, oh, I want to emulate X or like I want to be just like, so and so. Those people didn't exist. And so we were like authentic because there was no other way to be. And the other thing I will say is authenticity also comes naturally when you are forcing yourself to put out a certain amount of content. Like if you're writing every single day, there's like you can only fake it for so long, you can only like make it super glossy for so long. Just like if you had a film crew following you around and filming every single moment of your day, your social media might look very different than what it does right now. And so what I think a lot of things happen these days is people have something in mind about what they like a preconceived idea of what that perfect life looks like, and thankfully I was not saddled with that perception because I was just like, hey, this is what we got. And by the way, it's kind of awesome, but I need to remind myself of that every once in a while. And so that storyline of, hey, I'm a hot mess, but it's still pretty cool, is kind of my branding. But at that point, we had no idea. That was just me. I'm a hot mess. But hey, if I can do it, you can do it. We got this. Let's keep going. And we're living the dream, even though the dream looks very different than maybe our preconceived ideas of the parenting book. Like no child has ever slept on a schedule perfectly, even though the book says it's going to. No child has hit those milestones perfectly, even though the book says so. So like the dream, even though, I think is really helpful. And I think the other thing is realizing that the dream that we have in our head is what we put in our heads. So like we put it in there to begin with. Like you didn't assign it to me. My parents didn't assign it to me. My best friends didn't assign it to me. I built this up into my head, what I thought it was going to be. And then as with everything, when you're disappointed, it's because your expectations were higher than reality. But you set the expectations. So I think one of the things that I would just encourage anyone, and I have this conversation with myself all the time, even today, is like, you're like, oh, this day sucks. And then you're like, okay, wait a second. What did I expect? like, what did I expect? Was that realistic? Like, am I having a good life even though I'm like lower than those expectations? Yes. Like, let's count those blessings. And then all of a sudden, and it's kind of that zoom out, look at the situation, like, hey, would I trade places with anyone in the world, even though no? Okay, like let's go back in and live life. And I think that was really like that perspective of zooming in and out, like finding that silver lining, even when, and I mean, there's days that that's going to be a lot easier than others. And it's okay to have a day that's just like, I'm going to hold my expectations and put them on pause. I'm going to reassess maybe next week, next Monday. Let's give this a go again. Because I think part of what's happening in the world today is that we feel very judged on any given moment because people are posting them to social media and so-and-so's at the beach and so-and-so just had a perfect family picture and so-and-so had this and I have nothing today. But I always think back to even though I had bloggers children who had a lifetime of having pictures, because I was a scrapbooker before that. So every moment of their life has been photographed to a certain extent. When we did the family photos, there were tears involved. There was like a child stomping off and hiding behind a tree and threats and like, hey, this is what's going to happen if you don't get over here and smile. Yet that photo came together and then I post that online like that just spontaneously happened. Hell no. Like, no, that's not how life is. Like that was an hour and a half's worth of work and threatening and, and coming together and, psychology to get that photo. Yet if you just looked at that family photo and you're like, oh my God, Holly has it so easy. And we do that to each other every single moment online. And I think a lot of times we need to step back and say, like, it isn't just that snapshot, like that, like so much more is behind that snapshot that we don't know.
I appreciate you sharing that, because what I'm sensing with you of how you're talking about this is that I feel like the key to your success has been your authenticity and and your perspective, your point of view, like how big did the blog grow to, like didn't you have over 1 million followers or
Yeah,
like,
so Kids Activities blog kind of at the peak of, blogging a few years ago was, I mean, I was getting, 10 million page views a month. I have 3.5 million fans on Facebook, 300,000 on Instagram. I have, 500,000 on Pinterest. Like all these places that, I could tell my stories when at the heyday of being able to actually connect through content, it resonated because I'm not alone in counting down the hours to bedtime. You know what I mean? Like I can make 7 more hours. I can make 6 more hours. I can make 5 more hours. And yet, this is what I want. I am living the dream. Yet, it's okay to say, like, oh my God, it sucks sometimes. Or, like, and just the silly little things that happen to everyone. Like, I don't know, like, I was always talking about things that, like, just are weird. Like, why is life weird? Like, why are these little things weird and like irritating and silly? But then when you look back, it actually is what makes life interesting. Like, otherwise, like, you have no stories.
I love it. And so let's shift gears a little bit because I
Mhm.
want you to share a moment of courage that occurred to you when you went on a TV show and froze, but that was a pivotal moment.
Mhm.
And I want the listener, as you're listening, to put yourself in Holly's shoes as she tells this story of what would you have done and would you have come out of it in the same way, and challenge yourself versus let me go hide and turn this into like this thing. But you tell the story, Holly, because it says so much of who you are as a person and this being able to see the silver linings and everything as I'm getting to know
I was
you.
gonna say, when you mentioned the story, I still like my skin crawls because even though I mean it was 15 years ago, it like was so horrifying. So I'm in the Dallas area, and one of the things that happens on local television is on holidays and some of these things like the TV shows are looking, local TV is looking for people to come on. And so what they did back then is they started realizing that bloggers were like more than willing to share things, publicly. And so I started getting asked to come on television, usually like the day before Thanksgiving or like, these places that they have no one, like the bottom of the barrel, let's call Holly. And so it's always like really weird fits, like, hey, we need you to talk about X. And I'd be like, all right, but I got nothing. And so it was usually kind of interviews. And I always thought, I want these contacts because someday they're going to ask me about to share something that I know something about. And we had no idea what this was going to look like. So I was just, like I said, I was just trying a bunch of different stuff to see what would happen. So it was the first time that they had asked me to come on a morning segment to talk about kids' activities. And I run kids' activities blog, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So we're out, if you've ever been to, it was out in Victory Park, which is, we're outside on a shot because it's summer. And I'm going to talk about how to keep your kids busy this summer. And I'm one of like 2 or 3 people that they're going to go to for like a minute segment. And I know I have about 45 seconds. And so I was, I had my points and I had some stuff in front of me on a table and they throw to me and I freeze. Like nothing will come out of my mouth. And I'm horrified. And like when you're like nervous and like have a panic, like there's no exit to that's graceful or I just remember in the middle of this like freezing, I'm like, really? This is what you're doing right now? You know, like I was horrified. And so of course, like the weird thing is I've watched television a lot in my life. I've never seen anyone else do this. like, it's live television. I'm frozen, you know, like of course they have to figure out what to do and work around me. So they basically skip over me and they never come back. So oh my gosh. So like I live 45 minutes from the television studio and I just like ran out of there and cried the entire way home. Like and just prayed that no one that I knew ever watched the television again. So, you know, and I just like yelling at, and you know how you talk to yourself in ways that you would never talk to someone else. And you're just like, how could you be so stupid? How could you be like, you're the only person in the world that has happened to? Like, how embarrassing. Like, what do I have to do to, like, I never want to feel like that again. Like, I never want to feel like that again. And like, this is something that I really, like, I think I would be good at. Like, I think I would be good at like sharing my experiences, even if it's on video and not just through my words and writing. And so I went home and I thought, like, how would I practice this? Like, how would I even practice this? Like, and then this shows my age because at that point, Google had a social media called Google Plus, which I know no one has heard of unless they're old. But they had just launched live video. I'm very low tech. So one of the obstacles to recording a video is that I would need to edit it in some way. And so I just said, what I'm going to do is start posting video without editing, whether that's live video or just holding up my camera. And at that point, that wasn't a phone. But like whatever it is, I'm not going to let the excuse of tech in the way. I'm just going to start posting a video a day, whether it's recorded straight to YouTube or live video. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, Holly Homer YouTube channel, you can go back to the early ones where I'm basically saying, I'm turning this damn machine on because I need to get over this fear I have of video. And so it was probably, you know, if I look back, it was about 100 hours. And I know you've probably heard that, like you can kind of master something. And I wouldn't say I mastered it at 100 hours. I think the fear of going on a kind of like subsided. Like I was like, okay, I've done enough that. So, but what I found out is I love video. Like, thank you for inviting me. I love video. And what that did was open the door because I took that and I was like, say, I never want to feel like that again. Ran with it in a way that made me practice it every day until I got better at it. And the funny thing is, whatever you're fearful of, I hate to break it to you, that's probably what you're called to. Eventually, there was a season in my life a few years ago that I was on live video 3 hours a night, like 5 to 6 days a week. And so if you think about if I had just, what I wanted to do was just crawl into bed and watch trash TV for the rest of my life. And if I had done that, I would have literally missed out on some of the greatest opportunities that I've had because, and I'm so thankful for them because like, I get it. Like that sucks. When your whole world falls apart on live video, it kind of sucks.
That's amazing though. Once again, it seems like you're really good at overcoming those fears and setting the trends unconsciously, you know, of like blogging, but then it sounds like you were doing video blogging, you know, it's like, okay, well then I'm, you know, like I sucked at this, I froze, let me take my own video and, you know, like I'm just going to do it live every day. And you're really good at not like letting the excuses come in the way. Like you find ways around it. Like you set a goal and you're like, okay, I don't like text, so let's do it live. So what came out of the videos and what are you up to today?
Yeah, so I mean, so many opportunities, so many doors are open to those of us who are willing to say, what's the worst case scenario? I freeze on live television, already done that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and by the way, when I came to the internet and said, hey guys, guess what happened a few days ago? So embarrassed. Oh my gosh. You know what? Like, people are not like, oh my God, Holly, you suck. How dare you come back to the internet after such an embarrassing, like, we only talk to ourselves that way. We don't talk to each other this way. You know what I mean? Like, you get this overwhelming, sense of support of people saying, legitimate people, not trolls. People saying, "Oh my gosh, like, I have those feelings. I can't yet." Like, it's very connecting to other people because guess what? Part of being human, part of the reasons why we like each other is because we share some of the same insecurities, share some of the same quirkiness, share some of the same silliness. And it, like that gloss, and this is what drives me nuts about especially like Instagram and like that glossy exterior, nobody connects with that. Like there's no freaking connection with the glossiness because that's not, as humans, like it's our vulnerabilities that make us attractive to each other to a certain extent. So anyway, so going forward, part of what I'm doing now is because of that low tech situation is, fast forward, 10 years, like I have a blog, I want to sell things online. And I literally Google how to sell things online because that's the girl I am. And I fell into what those of you in internet marketing understand as a funnel, and then went through a whole bunch of funnel building coaching and high ticket coaching situations where people could show me how to build these expansive funnels to basically do what television has been doing for a really long time in infomercials of wait, there's more. And overcomplicating life because in order to use a funnel and to build a funnel, we're talking about hours and hours of expertise and knowledge and building and technical stuff that is just not my style. So about 3 years ago, I was complaining to my business partner, Rachel Miller. We have a site together called One Crazy House, and we were putting up a bunch of products on that site and saying, like, why is building these sales pages for these simple products so hard and so expensive? Like, this is just stupid hard. Like a normal person like me can't do it. And I don't have the bandwidth in my life for this stupid tech. And she said, I think I can solve it. And she was thinking about figuring out how to automate some of it because we're building a series of products that were very similar. And then she came back and she said, I think we need to, make a software and we'll solve this problem for other people too. I like, me, I'm up for anything. And so I'm like, okay. So 3 years later, we've solved the issue. It wasn't an easy path to get here. Like nothing of value ever is easy, but we've launched PageWheel about a year ago. And what PageWheel does is uses AI because in the process of creating it, AI came around and we were always using it behind the scenes. We implemented it in a simple way, even if you've never used AI, that will build you basically a digital product, a sales page, an offer page, a delivery, all the tech that you would need to sell that online or like a workshop or a course or an event or any of those things. We can create it in a matter of literally minutes without any tech skills. And that's what PageWheel does. And so we have a community now around PageWheel of people just like me who are low tech, who just want to share their passions online and don't want to worry about the technology. And so it's, again, coming from my pain point that led to something that has been really, really fun.
Oh, that's great, Holly. And I love how you followed that and how aware you are. Like you're saying, it was a pain point. Well, what can
Mhm.
we make? What can we do with it? And the kids aren't at home anymore. They're adults. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to be doing kids' activities. So what am I passionate about right now? And so I just love your point of view in life of just seeing the positive within all the craziness that it is being a human and going through this life journey. As we wrap up, where can people find you?
So I still run kids activities blog. So if you have children, that's a really good place to be. We have just, and then PageWheel.com is really where I'm spending most of my time now. And that's the software and behind the scenes, and you can find us on Facebook in a group and stuff like that, is we have a lot of education because even though the tech is very, very simple, kind of thinking about how to sell those things can feel complicated and overwhelming, especially to those of you who might be doing a side gig or a passion project and stuff like that. So it's a really good place just to hang out with us and learn.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then I love asking my guests this at the end. What can our listeners do to live a life with more courage?
I really think to rework what you say to yourself sometimes and start talking to yourself more as a friend than you talk. Like, think about if this was my best friend that found themselves in this scary situation or this life situation or this like silly irritation, like what advice would I give? And often I think that advice is very different, that internal tape that runs in our head to ourselves. And if we can give ourselves grace, it's easy to be strong and courageous when you give yourself grace.
Thank you. Oh, so beautifully said. Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Hi there. I have something really cool for you. I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. You can check out all the details in the show notes, and all you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobee@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course.